Shana Tova, Happy New Year. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are now behind us. While this New Year celebration has certainly been unique, each of us separately participating in services from our own spaces, surely we have recognized how connected we are. Jews all around the world and right here on Chicago's North Shore, all praying together, regardless of physical distance. Let's review the journey we've taken together in our calendar. The High Holy Day season really began way back in July with Tisha B'Av, the summertime holiday, commemorating the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Our sages attributed the destruction of the temple to sinat chinam, or baseless hatred among the people. Seeing that during the Second Temple period, the people occupied themselves with Torah, with observance of mitzvot, and with the practice of tzedakah, righteous giving, the rabbis of the Talmud asked, why was the Second Temple destroyed? The answer they came to is that during this time it stood, baseless hatred prevailed. A sin, they taught, that was even worse than idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed combined. More than 2,000 years after the destruction of the temple, we still struggle with the plague of baseless hatred today. Like many of you, I am afraid for us. I watched this week as President Trump and Vice President Biden sparred in the first presidential debate of the season. I'd like to respond to Tuesday's debate through the lens of the High Holy Day season in which we find ourselves. If the holy days are a time for each of us to look into the proverbial mirror, to notice the soul work we must do, surely this week's debate is evidence that collectively there is much work to be done. As my teacher, Rabbi Yoshi Zweiback, reflected, we must turn away from the coarseness, indecency, and lack of respect for the other that characterizes so much of our political discourse. We must, as a nation, remember that we are supposed to care about each other, about one another's struggles, pains, and losses, mindful that we are all created b'tselem Elohim in God's image. We must treat one another with respect, compassion, and love. What's most troubling to me is the uptick in hatred among the general public. Just this week, we learned from a group of researchers working for major American universities, as well as think tanks on both the left and the right. They reported an upswing in the past few months in the number of Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, who said they think violence would be justified if their side loses the upcoming presidential election. The group reports that among Americans who identify as Democrat or Republican, 1 in 3 now believe that violence could be justified to advance their party's political goals, a substantial increase over the last 3 years. The numbers are even higher among Americans who identify strongly with a political party. According to the researchers' findings, leaders play an essential role in fueling the fire or extinguishing the flames of violence among their followers. As one rabbi who lived in the days of the Second Temple reminds us, if there is a glowing coal and you blow on it, it ignites. If you spit on it, it goes out. Therefore, we must hold our leaders, and each other for that matter, accountable for the words we choose to speak, both what we say and don't say. According to Jewish tradition, it's taught death and life are in the power, literally the hand of the tongue. According to one ancient translator, our tongue is like a double-edged sword, with both the power to create and the power to destroy. As evidenced by the disturbing reality of our nation's comfort with violence in the name of politics, it's a question of death and life. What we say matters. What our president says and doesn't say matters. I want to be clear that this is not about where any of us fall on the political spectrum, whether we tend to vote Democrat, Republican, or somewhere in between. When asked this week to denounce white supremacists and militia groups mobilizing around the country, I had hoped to hear President Trump say unequivocally that he denounces white supremacists. Instead, I was appalled to hear President Trump's dog whistle to the Proud Boys, that same group who marched in the streets of Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us." He said to stand back and to stand by. This is indulging in sinat chinam, baseless hatred that still exists in our society today. 2,000 years ago, our Jewish sages warned that sinat chinam was the poison that destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And if unchecked, it will continue to destroy our world if we do not work to root it out. It's up to us. It's up to us to hold our leaders and each other accountable for what we say and what we do. Denouncing anti-Semitism and hate is neither hard nor should it be political. We, especially as Jews, cannot be complacent in this regard. We must all demand that our highest officials speak with awareness and understanding the impact that their words have on the health of our nation and our standing around the globe. Tonight, the holiday of Sukkot begins. The holiday here at the end of the holy day season when we build impermanent huts to dwell in for 7 days. Let's consider the sukkah as a microcosm of our world. Sukkot, the booths we build, are temporary structures subject to the elements. The impermanent nature of the sukkah is an apt metaphor for the shaky reality of our world. The reality is that is the place in which we live our lives, never truly certain of what will come next. These holy days remind us time and again that we are utterly vulnerable. But just as we construct Sukkot as a reminder of our vulnerability, so too do Sukkot remind us that we indeed have power to create the environment in which we wish to live. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. We have power, even when life is at its most overwhelming, the most chaotic, to build and create structure in our lives. It's up to each of us to use our voice to root out the baseless hatred in our communities. Whether spoken or written, social media, emails to friends and relatives, we must live out our Jewish values and speak out, blotting out hate wherever it arises, building a better, more kind and compassionate world for us all. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.